Hello, I am Grainne Watson. I am the Chief Digital Officer of Searchlight. Today I'm going to be speaking to Mark Cook, who's going to introduce himself as our Executive Chairman. We're going to be talking about transformation and what it means to us. I've been working in technology for the past 10 years across continents and in various different things. Data would be one of my specialties. Mark?
Yeah, thank you. So as chairman to Steve Sharp, the CEO of Searchlight, my job is to get the best from the individuals that we have in Searchlight, also making sure we're properly interacting with the marketplace. So I'd say, though, let's talk a bit about governance and program management and cadence of running a transformation. Because one skill set that has always been fairly rare is good project management, good program management, and the way you run projects and programs. It's definitely done differently now. So back in the day, first wave enterprise systems, probably it could be 18 months before the user actually saw anything on the system. It was all the prep work in advance. You build a business requirements document, you get it signed off with the business. You then build a system requirements document that match the business requirements document, etc., etc. Lots of work streams, lots of functional areas, building things offline before you actually saw anything in the system. And you were trying to get your data sorted out at the same time. Now with Agile and sprints and the way you can very quickly, produce something, fail fast and move on, but it still needs really good program management. You still need to keep track of where you are. Everybody needs to be communicated with. But be interested in how you see projects working now at speed and pace and manage to keep that control and compliance.
Well, funny enough, it has gotten better in a lot of ways, to your point, because it's much quicker. So your ability to say, here's what we're going to do, right? Here's the things we're going to get done in this sprint. Is everybody okay with that? We're going to do. That's great because it's much quicker and people see what's happening. The downside to that is scope creep, which means that if you don't have a project manager who is on top of everything, something is always in development, which is not transformation either. Do you know what I mean? You have to actually have the ability to say, here's the scope. There's no more changing of the scope. What will change slightly probably is how we build what it is that we said we'd build, but the scope can change. And similarly, what I've seen people who do DevOps beautifully and who stick to the Agile way of working. But then what you also get on the other side is people who define Agile as we're just going to wing it, and Agile is not winging it. Agile is doing things more effectively, more quickly. And so there are two bad ends of a wedge, and without proper project management, it's going to go wrong one of two ways. You're either going to it's never going to come out of development and into production because you're changing everything every 10 minutes, or you've gone way over what you said you do. So, you've started building a system that's going to do joiners, movers, leavers, and end of 6 months, they want that and then 15 other things on top of it.
And what I always, if I was leading a piece of work from a consultancy perspective, working with a client, the commercials come into mind. I'd never overtly talk about commercials to the customer. I'd always talk about the single lens of what are we trying to deliver, the milestones, what are we trying to develop, and keep a focus on that. And typically we maybe time and materials, but typically it was milestone based in terms of the commercials. The trick was getting everybody onto the same page. So we wanted things signed off jointly. So we had mechanisms in the way that we ran our transformation programs to ensure there was a kind of zippering up. There was a marrying of, if you're chief digital officer, then who's the client's chief digital officer, and you can sign things off jointly and kind of step through that process. That must get really tricky in this new DevOps Agile world, because how do you control that? I mean, it's very difficult.
It is very difficult, but you still do the marrying up, and then it's still communication. You have to communicate effectively, and that's the beauty if you're doing Agile right. So you have what we tend to do is daily stand-ups, and that's basically the program board and everybody actually doing the work. But then we have, at the beginning of each sprint and at the end of each sprint, then you have that wider team. Here's what we agreed to. Here's what you agreed to last time. Here's what's been built off the back of that. Are we still okay? Are we still on track? Let's go on with that. So it's still communication, but with so many more stakeholders, you have to be really clear about that you need to turn up to those meetings because that is where decisions are being made. Because then what tends to happen, as I'm sure you know, is people say you invite them to the meeting, they don't turn up, then they want to know what's happening 4 weeks later and they haven't agreed with half the things that have been built.
Yeah.
So it's incumbent on everybody in that transformation to attend those meetings because they know that decisions are made. Because otherwise, you're chasing people and then you're way off in terms of build time. And customers don't like that either. Clients definitely don't because they feel as though they're being held up. But then you have to put the onus back on them. And again, we're back to me being extremely clear about what is needed and why. And most people, if you explain it to them effectively and you know this, they absolutely understand why it's important. But if you miss the communication piece, it can be a world of pain.
Yeah. I mean, some of the bigger transformation programs I led and ran, having absolute clear understanding. So you could have a 600-page project plan and say, look, this is how we're going to do it. Well, so what? No one actually understands that. It's like having a map of how to drive around the world and trying to kind of understand it and memorize it all. So using physical graphics around work breakdown structures, spending time to describe and explain how work gets done and why, and then more importantly, the integration points and interdependencies is really key. And we changed our sort of weekly project meetings from being, rather than dull status updates, this is all the stuff we've done, we had working sessions on where are you holding me up? So if I'm lead infrastructure person or I'm lead data person, what do I need from each other? And actually try and resolve those points. It becomes a lot more interactive and a lot more focused on kind of hitting those
Yeah.
problem issues. Yeah, be
I'm
interesting your
just
thoughts on.
laughing because one project I was on, the dev team wanted to do their updates between 10 and 12 on a Monday and just went ahead and did it. 10 and 12 on a Monday happened to be when the client had their meeting about what was going on in their organization and where they were using it was dashboards and where they were using these dashboards to talk about it. And there's no communication. The techies just went, yeah, fine, we're going to do it this way. And then I was the account person, so then I get a phone call saying, where are all the dashboards? I'm like, well, they should be there because I hadn't even been told. And then I had to go and find out, and they're like, oh, yeah, we're updating them. No, you don't update something between 10 and 12 on a Monday because as you and I both know in business, most meetings of where are we going this week or what's happening are held on a Monday. So
Yeah,
that is not your day to update anything, nor is 10 to 12, which is prime business time, a time to update it either. You do it early in the morning or you do it later at night. Full stop.
yeah. Reporting was also a really difficult topic. So back in the day, to get a report produced involved usually someone specifying it, but not always, and someone going away and developing it and not getting it quite right and iterating that 100 times. And what tended to happen was the business would cover itself by saying, well, if I have these 158 reports, it's going to slice and dice it whichever way I want, and actually it should give me it in the end. And
Mm.
that created a huge amount of effort and work. Now, what's different nowadays are dashboards, KPIs, ways of getting quick sight on functionality of the business.
Mm.
The only interesting thing then is modern management actually equipped enough to know what to do with the KPIs and the data they're getting? And I'd be interested in your thoughts on how people look at data and KPIs.
Well, the interesting thing about it is people think of it as being very automatic, but as you know, you've asked somebody to cut the data that way. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's absolutely free of bias. Instead, they've cut it the way that you've asked them to. So, what modern management sometimes tends to do is be data driven when in fact it needs to be data informed. If you've asked it a very specific question, you will get the very specific answer that you sought. Half the time, after all the build, you realize that wasn't the answer that was needed. So then you have to be very careful about what it is you're asking of the data. And it's the same thing when we talk about algorithms. And people say, like, very scientifically, algorithms, which I then say that are built by a person, which have their inbuilt biases. So it's interesting because some modern management teams are absolutely all over it. You being one of them. You are one of the You're one of the most detail-orientated people I've ever worked with, which works for me because I'm extremely detail-orientated and quite grumpy, which you already know. And because I like the detail and I need to know exactly what it is that you want. But some teams just, the data becomes the gospel, and that's a problem if it's
I
not
mean,
what you need.
to me, technology, software, systems, it's a means to an end.
Yeah,
It's the end that excites me.
yeah.
So I've got a business today. If I can automate it, make it more efficient, and it's going to give me a whole bunch of reporting and KPIs and data, is it going to tell me something that I didn't know about the
Yeah,
business? That's the exciting thing.
yeah.
And I think if you think about transformation, what is it you're trying, where do you want to get to at the end of the transformation? If it's more sales, right, what are the KPIs that you need to monitor to know that you're getting more
Mhm.
sales? Well, your pipeline needs to grow so you can monitor things in CRM. Actually, I want to be selling more higher margin portfolio items, so I want some KPIs around those things. And you build those KPIs in to get you to that end game. And then in terms of the reporting, the functionality and the data, that's what you want to be looking at. I wonder how often do we get data or reporting for our business and think, oh, I didn't know that. I never asked for that. But that's telling me something I didn't know. And you can take it all the way back to Lotus 123 and spreadsheets. Spreadsheets are supposed to be what if.
Mm-hmm.
Let's plug in some assumptions and see what. I think that's quite rare, actually. I
Yeah.
think it's quite rare that people in a business, running a business, get data, because we all talk about it, data rich, monetizing data. How often is it telling them something that they know what to do with or didn't know? Before?
Rarely, because most of the time when you're asking for that data, it's because you either know there's a problem or you know it's exceeding what you thought it did. So
Hmm.
I think the surprise comes in what level it's at. So say you thought you were up and then you see it and you're way higher than you thought, then that's something you didn't know. You didn't know you were way higher than you thought you were going to be. Or similarly, if something isn't working as effectively and then you've been told, so say you're sitting at the top and you know this, the message gets nicer the further it gets up the chain, and all of the badness has been, all the edges have come off and it's nice and smooth. Whereas if you say, okay, well, I need to actually see that from a KPI point of view, so something you were told is not that bad turns out being 45% down when you actually look at the data, and it's the swing that is the interesting bit. But to your point, it's rarely the data because
I guess retail, I worked in retail for a while, and that was interesting. So the weekly sales reports, let's say you've got thousands of stores out there or today online portals, and you've got lots of SKUs that are being sold out there, keeping an eye on how those are going, which demographic, that's really interesting. If it's a physical store, you get things like planograms which put promotional items at
Mm-hmm.
eye level or the front of the store. So that should be attracting people's attention. I mean, that's really fascinating. Again, modern technology today, you can probably tell who's shopping. If they're in your loyalty card
Mm-hmm.
club, you probably know that they've been to a store when they've gone and what they've bought. What was always fascinating to me is what they didn't buy. So why did a 35-year-old male go into a store in London at 10 o'clock at night but not buy anything? And it's probably because he works on projects or works in banking, he works late. He wanted to quickly find a toothbrush or some shaving foam and couldn't see it, was in a hurry, store was closing, bang, people leave. That's really interesting data. It's be interesting in your views on that. And the other one was around IoT, sort of smart IoT. So how smart is it? So if you've got a venue, a function, a stadium, whether it's sports or whether it's a pop concert, and you've got promotional things going on where people are signing up to get discount at the bar or whatever it happens to be, what can you do with that data? How interesting will it be to the people that are running the venue?
So it depends what you're looking from the data. So recently, well, not recently, so a couple of jobs ago, we were working on kind of room management. How many people are using these rooms and when? And we were using the Wi-Fi data, right? So it's all IoT. So wherever those sensors are, they're picking up the data. Problem is, just because they're being picked up on that sensor doesn't mean they're not being picked up on another one. So that room might not be in use. They might be, I mean, the areas tend to be what, between 5 and 7 meters. So you could be quite far away. Someone could be paying for that room to have it running and they're not actually sitting there.
Mhm.
So if you're trying to figure out where people are and why, it's not that useful based on your sensors. I had the same thing with a very famous museum who were trying to figure out if they could use sensor data to figure out how many people were in the building, because what they were for fire and all of that, because what they were previously doing was counting people in. And the counting people in, by the way, was better than the data, which you would have guessed anyway.
With
So
a
it's
clicker.
yeah, absolutely with the clicker. But again, they weren't double counting people because the sensors were. And similarly, not everybody who comes in joins the Wi-Fi. So then you're back to the point of, well, who's on the Wi-Fi and who isn't. So for things like that, it's somewhat useful, but it's not an exact science.
I think things like movements, footfall, transitional data is quite interesting. And if we think of if we're using Google Maps to look at a journey before we travel on it. I mean, we're not that interested that there's 2,500 people queuing on the M25 at Junction 4, but we are interested. It says it's red and it's a 15-minute delay kind of thing. And I know you've heard my example before around footfall through things like airports. So where are people actually physically walking to get to A from B, A to B, when there's 6 different options? And actually knowing that they choose option C is kind of where you want to put promotional things if you've got retail outlets. So that's actually quite interesting. But it's probably giving you data and insights into something that you didn't realize that's what you're asking, which I think is the earlier point.
Yeah.
If someone specifies something, they're going to get back what they asked for. But there also is some really interesting things to get data related to something you didn't realize why you were asking it, and actually it informs you in a different way.
Well, look at a couple of airports now. So Belfast City and Glasgow. Now you have to walk through the shops to get where you're going. We didn't have to previously. You
Yeah.
used to, you could go in other ways. You didn't go in. Belfast City now, you come up and it's the only way through. So you first have to go through all the smelly things and all the alcohol, and then you hit another retail unit. And it wasn't like that previously, but that's clearly based on data and is to improve people's spend.